So hello, dear listeners. You are on the Ukrainian Review channel, and today I thank you, Isaac, for joining us today. Here is the Isaac Yeung, and he represents the organization Bird of Light Ukraine, right?
Yes,
Can you tell a little bit more about this organization, about this fund, about this initiative?
sure. Yes, my name is Isaac from Bird of Light Ukraine. We are a charity that was founded in Ukraine during the early days of the war in February 2022. And since then, we've been operating in the country. We've delivered over $5.5 million in aid, and we've been quite active across the country.
Sure. If we talk about the assistance to Ukraine, aid to Ukraine, what is the difference between nowadays and the beginning of the war? Is it the more people share their money or funds, or it's just a little bit difficult to find this aid for Ukraine now than 1.5 years ago?
Well, yeah, so the answer is, of course, yes, there is significant differences compared to the beginning of the war. Um, the biggest thing I would note is that the donations from individuals have certainly decreased, but also donations from larger institutions have increased. And so I wouldn't say it's changed, but I think it's changed a lot for the better. As you can see, the donations that come from, for example, governments, that come from large charities, come from corporations, are a lot more substantial than what small individuals are able to produce. So I think it's a definitely a change, but it's also one that's been for the better, in my opinion.
Yeah, and if we talk about the advocacy for assistance, how and with whom to talk about the assistance to Ukraine, for example, in the United States or in Canada? Is it more funds or is it more great enterprises or just individuals?
Um, okay. So if anyone is looking for aid for Ukraine, um, first of all, I think it's going to come from large institutions. It's not going to come from small individuals anymore. And so if we're talking just strictly on the topic of fundraising, um, you're going to want to talk to large charities. You're going to want to talk to wealthy individuals because those are the individuals that have the ability to deliver meaningful impact in the contributions they're able to create. Those are also the ones that have greater impact within society so they can make larger changes. So, um, yes, I would say like you definitely be talking to larger entities about this. But is there something perhaps you would like to elaborate on this question?
What?
Is there something perhaps you would like to elaborate on this question? I feel like there's some more you'd like to dig out of this.
So I wanted to talk about what's the change of the position between the institutions and the local population and the individuals from the beginning of the war and now, because now a lot of people is just tired about the news, about the war, etc., etc. But Ukraine needs more assistance even now because Ukraine faced some how to say, a lot of difficulties and challenges in face of the winter, in face of the Russian offensive, and so on and so on. My question is that are not Americans or Canadians tired to donate Ukraine? Are they have this spirit that they're lost to donate years ago, years on and on, because this war is not stopping forecast months, weeks, or even, I don't know, some short time.
Yes, so I actually have a lot to say about this topic. So when it comes to um, donations, it's the general or when it comes to support for Ukraine, really, the general public already fully supports Ukraine. As you can see in polls, Americans, Canadians, most individuals from Western countries overwhelmingly support Ukraine. So it's really a matter of how much aid should be donated. Because individuals, yes, they can send small dollars, but it's ultimately governments that control large budgets. America can approve billions of dollars, Germany can approve billions of dollars, same with Canada. It's not going to be the individuals. But that being said, I think the question should be pivoted slightly into how much aid should be delivered to Ukraine. Because there's actually, if you notice in how the aid has been delivered to the country, there is internal debates about this topic. For example, when Ukraine was asking for HIMARS, there was hesitation. When Ukraine was asking for, Leopard tanks, Abrams, hesitation. When Ukraine was asking for F-16s, or hesitation. So I think instead of a conversation around um, does the public support Ukraine? Is there enough public support? The question should really shift to how much aid does Ukraine need? How much aid should be sent? And on specifically on this topic, um, if you take a look at it, there's actually an internal debate between two camps, I would say. One you could call well, they're political realists, and those are political idealists. Now, realist is a term in geopolitical theory, and we're not going to get into that. But another way you can look at it is a debate between the pragmatists and the idealists, because the pragmatically minded people, for example, will see that Ukraine losing is a terrible thing. Ukraine in the current status quo is okay, but a Ukrainian victory is a little bit of a confusing situation. There's a unexpected element there. There's fear around Russian nukes, Russian retaliation. What does a world order look like if Russia collapses? So there's a lot of hesitation in this debate around how much aid to be delivered, actually.
Sure. And from this topic, we can turn to another question. How might the US position change after the election of the new Speaker of the House of Representatives and after the election of the US President in November 2024? What is your opinion? Because it's a lot of polls that Trump can get the House after 4 years of Joe Biden, and it's a threat for Ukraine, and maybe it's a very painful question for the rest of the East European states because they face this existential threat from the Russia. So, what is your position? Do the United States of America continue to support Ukraine if the Republicans win the White House, or is just under discussion?
So, first of all, I want to be clear that I'm a Canadian here. So this is my Canadian opinion. Also, I'm not a political polling expert. So that aside, I actually don't think that the current situation in the American politics is necessarily that bad for Ukraine. Yes, the speaker is holding hostage passing of bills, and that makes it difficult to pass new spending bills for Ukraine. But that being said, Democrats and Republicans overwhelmingly support Ukraine. The ones who are holding out are a vocal minority, the MAGA Republicans. But generally, you see a lot of support from older Republicans. Mitch McConnell, for example, is very supportive of Ukraine. And also, I have funny enough, a lot of Republican-oriented sponsors to my charity. So there is a lot of support from both sides of the aisle. And now, if there is issues in passing bills as a result of the current speaker, I believe that there are ways to get around this situation. And I believe that because there's so much will to sponsor Ukraine, there will be alternative funding solutions. They'll just have to be a little bit more creative than passing spending bills. And I would also say that I don't believe that the current situation in the House is necessarily bad for Ukraine in the sense that it has shown a lot of Americans in how Republicans have been governing, and it doesn't exactly paint a good picture. So while yes, it is bad that spending bills cannot be passed so easily right now, I think that this is this situation is helping Democrats in winning the next election just by showing the difference in ability to govern.
Okay, but my question is just two parts of the question, and the second part of the question: do the people in Canada, in particular, face the Russian as a threat? Because you just across the ocean and you don't feel this threat so close. But what is the feeling in public opinion about the Russian threat? Because you know that Russia can use not only the weapons, but for example, media or some proxies or some cyber attacks, so on and so on. Does the people across the ocean face the Russian threat?
So, if you were to ask an individual, the answer is no, because most individuals are not quite aware. But if you ask someone that is a little bit more, for example, if you ask for my opinion, um, I would say that the threat of Russia is primarily ideological, and that is also something that is it can't be dismissed. Uh, because Russia represents, in many ways, the authoritarian world where versus the liberal democratic world. Russia, along with countries like Iran, North Korea, and China. And so, if Russia were, for example, to seize victory, or if they were to make a lot of headway, it gives permission to other authoritarian countries to also make aggressive actions. It makes a send a signal that liberal democratic countries are weak in responding to authoritarians. So, in that sense, Russia is very much an ideological threat. If Russia was to win, the United States would lose all of their credibility, for example. Their word will have very little meaning. So, in that sense, yes, they are certainly a threat to the the current world order.
Maybe some personal question. Did you find some fakes in Canadian media about the Ukraine, Russian fakes?
Ye- Um, yeah, so you're referring to a fake news or
Yeah, fake
propaganda.
news or some sources not authorized but Ukrainian, and sometimes they look like the news, but it's not really news because it's some sort of fakes, lies, and so on and so on. So it's like an untrue fake fake news or fake analysis or fake representatives, so on and so on. It can be not only in the traditional media, but in social media, so on, in Facebook, in Twitter.
Yes. So propaganda is definitely Russia's strong suit, and Canada is especially is being faced by a lot of Chinese as well as Russian propaganda. And you can see it as well, very well in America, how they penetrated the far right MAGA Republicans with this. Um, so yes, I mean, in almost all sorts of media, you can see quite a strong uh, subtle Russian angle that has been penetrating the media, and even in more sorry, not as divisive, there's very subtle ways too. There's also the ability for Russian media to launder, so to speak, their media into Western publications. So the short answer is yes, there's tremendous amount of propaganda that Canada and America has experienced over the last few decades, and it's quite subversive within society, I would say, right now.
Mhm. And let me shift from Russia propaganda to Ukraine. Let's talk about the future. How you see the future of Ukraine, and in particular, do you see the perspectives of investment in Ukraine in the forecast future?
Um, uh, yes. So this is actually a topic that I've been working on. Um, yes, of course, there's a lot of room for investment to Ukraine, but it's not going to be till the war ends. There's a lot of interest. Well, I mean, let's take a step back and look at this from a geopolitical standpoint. Um, there's a lot of will to make sure that Ukraine succeeds post-war. You can see how the European Union is looking to bring Ukraine into the fold. You can see how America has put their blessings for Ukraine. So post-war, if Ukraine was to fail economically, this would be a terrible look for everybody. There's a very strong incentive for foreign nations to see Ukraine succeed. Um, as far as when I speak to individual investors about the country, there is still hesitation. A lot of this comes from the fact that one, the country is still in war, so no one wants to have an investment that is blown up. No one wants to have, who's going to ensure an investment into Ukraine besides certain entities like U.S. government. And also, there's certainly a fear around corruption for foreign investors into Ukraine still, but there is a lot of I would say idealism and a lot of hope for Ukraine post-war, and a lot of people are feeling a lot of kinship, especially Americans. You know, America, they see themselves as the land of the brave, and Ukraine today is taking up the mantle as a land of the brave. So there's a lot of willingness to visit Ukraine, to support Ukraine, and to help rebuild the country. But unfortunately, a lot of this won't come until there is some sort of peace treaty or until the war is concluded.
Yeah, you mentioned the corruption. So the corruption used by the Russian fake news much more than other topics. And if we talk about the Ukraine, Ukraine wanted to join to European Union. And Ukraine adopted a lot of the laws and legislation. And I know that maybe it's a stupid question, but what is the point of view across the ocean upon the progress of Ukraine if you look at Ukraine for the years? Did you see this progress in the laws, regulations, and different areas?
Um, so okay, as an if I was strictly an outsider, um, there is a lot of still there are fears about corruption because there are all these stories planted about theft in Ukraine, and there are some theft in Ukraine. And Ukraine has historically had a fairly bad reputation, excuse me, in this regard. That being said, there's a lot of from the actions of Ukrainian people and the Ukraine military and the government administration. There's also a sense of integrity that you can see in this country. So the reception, I would say, on a public standpoint, has improved on this. From someone that is a little bit more familiar to Ukraine, I do think that there is good progress being made in this front. Um, but it's hard to tell until everything is settled because one part of it is legislation, another part of it is cultural. But if strictly speaking, just my opinion, there's definitely positive progression.
Yeah, sure. And what is your opinion? How many years Ukraine need to be adopted into the European Union from your point of view if the war is over? How many years? Because a lot of people in Ukraine thought that it's just 1, 2, 3 years, but a lot of the experts mentioned that it's just a very long way. So maybe from the ocean, from the Canada, it's much more easy to see from distance and maybe to tell some advices to Ukrainian authority.
Well, I don't think my opinion is any more accurate than any experts. I'm a Canadian. I don't understand European politics so well. All I know is that EU officials have expressed that admission to the EU is by merit. So there's going to be a lot of requirements and a lot of legislation that needs to get passed in order for it to for that to complete. Otherwise, I honestly I cannot give an opinion about this.
Okay, so let me finish with the personal question. You was in Ukraine, and did you feel safe in Ukraine in the time of war, or just completely unsafe country?
Well, it's my tolerance for safety is very different from most people, simply because I was willing to live in Ukraine during most of the war. So it's I'm not exactly the best opinion on this. Um, Having been in Ukraine in the West, Ukraine is, I believe, is very safe as far as the West goes. But for most people, even many Ukrainian people, there is a sense of anxiety when the sirens go off. There's a sense of anxiety when you hear maybe a motorcycle go by because it might sound like a Shahed drone. So in the West, I generally feel quite safe. As in Kiev, it can feel not so safe many times, especially when there's sirens going off and drones. So um, the short answer is it feels as safe as it can get for a country that is not yet in peace.
Yeah, and very, very last question. In what terms you can characterize the Ukrainian victory? What is the Ukrainian victory, especially for you?
Um, okay. For me, a Ukrainian victory is really a victory for the liberal democratic world. Um, it's a victory where authoritarianism has been not vanquished but crushed in many ways, and it's a victory where Ukraine not only wins the actual physical war but is growing rapidly economically. Um, Now, I'm not going to make any statements about what the border looks like, but to me, a Ukrainian victory means uh, a Russian regime change. It means Russia, a lot of individuals in the Russian state questioning their political direction, and perhaps a shift in the political discourse and political direction in Russia itself. And that to me is what a victory would look like.
So there are no Ukrainian victory without the regime change in Russia, because some people in Ukraine, in public opinion, in some expert opinion, thought that Russia can never be changed at all. So it's nevertheless that Putin or another person on the top of the Russian policy is just Russia cannot change at all. Uh, do you support this statement, or you think that Russia can be changed to more democratic state and not so threat to be on the world?
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely, Russia can be changed because we've seen this so many times in history. Keep in mind, for example, let's talk some historical examples. China, for many years, was a country ruled by an emperor. And then the Republic of China came and they became a republic. Of course, communism came after, but keep in mind, Taiwan was also a dictatorship for many years until it became a democracy. Um, Nazi Germany, another example, went from a very hard authoritarian fascist country to democratic. Italy, same with that. Japan, similar with that. Over a course of hundreds of years or decades, however long, there can be, of course, a strong possibility for change, but we have to be willing to see that change is possible for that first to happen.
But unfortunately, the last decades, last years shown, if not a victory of the authoritarian regimes, but the rising of a lot of authoritarian regimes over the world. So you can see that some regimes in Africa, some regimes in Middle East, they wanted to rule their nations or neighbor nations by the authoritarian means. So does it mean that this is the final hour for the Western democracies to show their strength in face of the threat from the authoritarian states?
Um, yes, actually, let me take a step back. If if Western democracies did not stand up to Russia during the invasion in February 2022, then in my opinion that would have been a signal of the downfall of liberal democratic states. But because, for example, U.S., UK, Germany, European Union, a lot of these countries stood up together with Ukraine. It has shown the strength of liberal democratic countries. It has shown China and Russia that that these countries are not so weak ideologically and politically. Um, is it the downfall of authoritarianism? It's hard to say, to be honest. But I do think that as technology changes how we interact, it definitely makes information is much more available. It shrinks the borders, the cultural differences. And as people become more educated, they become more aware. I think this naturally brings about more, I would say, liberal tendencies. So it's hard to say from this standpoint, but I definitely don't think that liberal democracy is on the downfall. I think it's definitely on the rise, especially in how the support for Ukraine has been, as well as Ukraine's success against Russia these past 2 years.
Yeah, thank you for your opinion. And I think that the Western democracies go through the challenges and they pass this exam, and finally Ukraine win this war, and finally the Russia can represent the democratic regime at last. So thank you very much. It was Isaac Yeung from Bird of Light Ukraine, and I great thank you and for your time.
Thank you as well, Stanislav, and looking forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you very much.